Hello, everyone. I was debating with myself whether to even talk about this or not. At this point, if you're paying attention at all, probably a lot of what I'm saying is largely common sense. But there's still a lot of people who just aren't aware of what's going on in the world. They're locked into their jobs, they're busy with their families, they're not paying attention. They can't see the writing on the wall. And I do feel like I have a bit of a responsibility to warn people about some of the things that are coming and some of the things that could be coming. And, this isn't the world that your grandparents lived in, where they left their doors unlocked in small town USA and everything was hunky dory. Um, this is an election year, and the last one was compromised. And World War III is in slow burn right now with the proxy war in Ukraine, the Eastern power bloc against the Western power bloc, and whose version of the New World Order will come out on top is going to be decided by this conflict. Um, as I've mentioned in other videos, I do believe we are in that horsemen, so called four horsemen of the apocalypse time period, the lead up, the advance guard, the scouts, the lead up to the end times. We're not in the end times yet, I don't think, as in the tribulation. We're not there yet, I do not believe. But we are in that period of wars, rumors of wars, turmoil, upheaval, natural disasters, and specifically the four horsemen are uh, um, diseases and plagues, quite possibly man made bioweapons, warfare, and famine. And then the die-off effect of those three. That's what the four horsemen of Revelation are, and I do believe we are in that period, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the lead up to the tribulation and the culmination of history as we know it. And we don't know how long this period's going to last. It could be decades. I know many people who think that the rapture and tribulation are just around the corner and could happen at any time. And certainly there are a lot of events moving behind the scenes, a lot of things going on that could lead fairly suddenly to those things coming to pass. I have mentioned in my videos, though, that I do see in the scriptures some prerequisites to the tribulation, and I don't think we're there yet. I don't think all those prerequisites have been met. I believe one of those prerequisites is the destruction of the United States of America, and there are a few others as well. But we are in tumultuous times. As I said, it's an election year. The last election in the United States, formerly the world's only superpower, was compromised. We know that conclusively, and I can't really talk about that much on YouTube because it's one of the major suppressed topics on this platform. But not only that, we are in a worldwide conflict, a proxy war in Ukraine. And things are going to be different going forward than they've been in the past. If you've been paying attention to the news, well, I don't know. I don't know if the mainstream media is talking about this stuff at all because I'm very unplugged from the mainstream right now. I get pretty much all my news through different channels at this point. Um, but there was an attack on a concert hall near Moscow. Uh, a small group of men went in with AK-47s and other battle rifles and just mowed down a great many people. Last I heard, the death count was over 120, and just awful. Now, it's my understanding that ISIS claimed responsibility for this attack, which is in itself really interesting because ISIS and Al Qaeda are fighting on the western side, on our side in Ukraine against the Russians. And actually, it's a fact. common knowledge at this point, Al Qaeda was created by the American CIA to counter the Russian invasion of Afghanistan back in the day. And we armed and trained Al Qaeda. And then supposedly Al Qaeda went rogue around the turn of the century and, pulled off 9/11, supposedly. And now they're back as part of our posse fighting against the Russians again, alongside ISIS fighters who are also there in Ukraine and elsewhere fighting the Russians. And ISIS did, supposedly to my knowledge, take credit for this mass shooting in a Moscow concert hall. The victims were civilians. And I'm actually surprised that an event like this, on a scale like this, has not happened in America before this point. I'm surprised it happened in Russia first. But I wasn't surprised that something like this happened. And when I saw it, my immediate thought was, this is a no Russian situation. What do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about this. No Russian is a mission in the 2009 video game Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. In the level, the player participates in a mass shooting at a Russian airport, although the player is not forced or told by the game itself to shoot any civilians and may skip the level altogether without penalty. So this is an old video game. This was a really controversial mission in this video game franchise when it came out back in the day, because nothing like this, putting the player in the shoes of a terrorist, had ever really been done before, at least not in mainstream gaming, to my knowledge. And so there was apparently actually a disclaimer at the beginning of this level in this particular game, which, if you know the franchise, Call of Duty, very popular first-person shooter genre of games, and these titles really are used as a recruiting tool. So yeah, I know it's entertainment, quote unquote, but really this particular franchise has connections to the establishment, and this is used as a way of making war seem glamorous to teenagers, especially young boys and young boy teens, and getting them interested in modern combat in the military and things like that. It's basically a recruiting tool for the establishment. But this particular level put the player in here's just an overview of the level. So the level was designed, interestingly enough, by I forget the name of the creator. Yeah, here we go, Mohammed Alavi, an Iranian. This is one of the most controversial video game levels ever, and it starts off with a group of guys in an elevator, and one of them looks around to the rest of the group, who are all kitted out in full military gear with basically I think they're SAWs or squad automatic weapons, something along those lines, belt-fed machine guns essentially. And he looks to the group and says, "Remember, no Russian." And they're in this elevator. The player is playing the role of a CIA operative who is embedded right here. Joseph Allen, Army Ranger PFC, Private First Class Joseph Allen, working as an undercover CIA asset in this terrorist cell, basically. And they're in this elevator. Then the elevator opens up, and it's obvious that they're in an airport terminal. The men walk out into the airport terminal. There are tons of civilians there, and they just open fire on the civilians. And in the course of the level, this team just walks through the airport and slaughters everything that moves. Eventually, Russian police come in, and the team encounters them. And at the end of the mission, most of the Russian terrorists get into a vehicle, I believe, and leave, but they kill the player character in this mission, the undercover CIA asset, and leave his body on the scene so that the Russians will find it, blame the Americans and the CIA for this mass shooting, which basically escalates a war with Russia, between Russia and the United States. And then the franchise goes on to discuss, because these Call of Duty, maybe it's just the Modern Warfare branch of games. I've played a little bit of these Call of Duty games, but not many, so I'm not really tremendously familiar with them, honestly. But I know some of them have kind of a parallel history or an alternative history, with modern weapons and things like that, but more of a Tom Clancy-esque sort of um, Armageddon World War III alternative history. And so the video game series then goes on to escalate to things like, nuclear weapons deployment and Russian troops paratrooping into northern Virginia, and then the player having to, fight off this Russian invasion in Fairfax, Virginia, and stuff as the Russians make a push towards DC and all this other stuff. Um, but this particular mission is interesting because you have a mass shooting that is used to escalate a conflict between the East and the West, specifically between the Americans and the Russians. And so when I saw this shooting in the concert venue in Moscow, that was my thought, because I knew about this Call of Duty mission already. My thought was, this is a no Russian scenario, and I would expect that we will see many more such scenarios, because especially in the United States, because our borders are wide open right now. Um, our borders were a sieve in 2005, and for reasons I'm not going to go into, I know that firsthand. I was down there in late 2005 and saw the border scenario there with my own eyes, and we were not in any kind of immigration crisis at that point in time, even though it was a post 9/11 world at that point. Um, but even at that point in time, you could just walk across the border, easy peasy, no problem. And now the border's wide open, with the Border Patrol actually being subverted to doing things like helping illegals across the border and making them sandwiches and providing housing for them and transport. That's the world we live in now, where the establishment, the federal government, which has been compromised, is actually actively assisting these hordes of literally millions of illegals to come into this country illegally. And a lot of these illegals, the vast majority of them, by the way, are young men of military age. Many of them are coming in with military gear, including camouflage, and some even with battle rifles. And if you don't know already, taxpayer dollars are being used to give these illegals phones with service plans for a couple years. They're being housed at taxpayer expense. They're being transported anywhere within the country, and for every parent and child, they're making some absolutely ridiculous amount of money a month. Each parent and child gets, it's over $1,000. I want to say it's like $1,400. So if you have two parents and two kids, they're being paid 2,800 or something outrageous in taxpayer money to live here. I mean, you think with that level of income, you could actually just not work and live entirely off the American taxpayer's dime. Just the things that are being given to these illegals to encourage this flood uh, of illegals into our country is astounding, and it's intentional, and it's a judgment by God against this country. Um, the Bible actually says that one of the judgments that God pronounces against Mystery Babylon is, "Surely I will fill thee with men." The idea being foreign men who are there with nefarious intent, and eventually they will, be a fighting force in this country? Why are they being given, these government issued cell phones? Well, so the government can track them. And, right now they're on the gravy train. Taxpayer money is paying for these illegals, everything, paying all their expenses. But down the road, what's going to happen? Because the government knows they're here illegally. Down the road, it'll be their phone rings. It's some FBI agent on the other side or CIA handler or, some other, establishment goon, basically. And they'll say, hey, so and so, Juan, we know who you are. We know where you are. We know you're here illegally. You're going to do a little something for us. Or we're going to arrest you, deport you, imprison you for being here illegally. And those illegals will have no choice but to do whatever that little favor is. And it's been pointed out that the government's buying up ammunition and buying up weapons. And, there's these gun grabs, but I really wonder, well, I say gun grabs, I meant gun trade in programs all across the country where people can trade in their firearms and then the government pays money for them, and supposedly they're destroyed. I really doubt they're being destroyed. I think they're being stockpiled, and the ones that are functional, and that they're there to be used to potentially arm an army of illegal aliens here to fight against the American people if the establishment decides that that is what the route they want to go. Um, and that would certainly explain why the government's buying up all manner of ammunition calibers, including calibers that aren't standard military or police calibers, like 38 Special or 357 Magnum. Why is the government buying all that stuff up? Well, it used to be decades and decades ago that those were standard calibers for police issue revolvers. My thought is they probably have stockpiles of old police firearms and things like that, but then also these guns that they're getting from gun buyback programs. And this stockpile of basically subpar firearms. I say subpar, but they're lethal. They're man killers. 357 Magnum is a proven man stopper. Um, these are very serviceable weapons. They're not, top of the line, current gen firearms, military grade firearms, but it doesn't really matter. A good quality um, firearm will last if it's taken care of for over 100 years or longer. And and my thought is that the government has a lot of firepower just standing by, ready to arm and equip and enlist these illegals when the establishment wants to do that. Uh, we've already seen, if you're paying attention, you know that there have been thousands of incidents in the last few years of attacks on American infrastructure, whether that's train derailments or weird things like prisons, which are, electronically controlled, all their doors just unlocking in the middle of the night and releasing a ton of prisoners, or safety controls going offline at some manufacturing plant and the plant catches fire or blows up, or, big fire at a dairy farm that just, or a big explosion, I should say, at a dairy farm that just kills, tens of thousands of head of cattle. Um, there is already a war going on here on American soil against American infrastructure and food supply. And these things are going to escalate. This is why I keep telling people seek food independence. If you're surviving on food from your supermarket, you need to ask yourself the question, what happens if my supermarket gets shut down or has no food and supply lines are cut off? Am I going to be able to feed myself and my family? Food independence means you're producing food, whether you have a little mini farmette or a garden or you keep chickens or have a few head of cattle. Um, Seek food independence now because we are in for a rough ride. World War III has started and it's not going to get better. It's going to keep escalating unless the Lord grants us some kind of reprieve here, and we are on the knife's edge this year. I can see the potential for things. Maybe God will give us a reprieve for a few years. But I see much more potential for things to just descend into chaos and another civil war here in the United States. And people are now openly talking about this stuff. They weren't, at least not to a great extent, openly talking about civil war back in summer 2019 when I wrote my book, How America Ends. They are now. And the federal government knows it. And the federal government is doing things like taking weapons and aircraft from the state National Guards in preparation for this because they don't want the states to be tremendously well armed if the people revolt against the federal government. You see what I'm saying? They don't want the states to have parity in a military conflict. Uh, Things are going to get weird, folks. And last week I saw this stuff and I was like, well, I'm not really. I actually planned out a video that I was going to call No Russian, and I might call this one that. I don't know. I haven't figured out the title 100% yet. But I said, no, I'm sure, people in my circles are already aware of this stuff. They're already prepared. But the reality is, I don't think as many people are prepared as I would like to believe. And I do have a responsibility to talk about some of these things and warn people. And so that was last week. And then this week, there was back in my native Maryland, where I don't live anymore. I left Maryland 2 years ago. After really for about, I want to say for about at least a decade, I've been trying to get out of Maryland. And thank God I finally was able to do that and move here to eastern Tennessee. Um, where recently, by the way, there was a terrorist attack here in eastern Tennessee. So I live near Morristown, um, one of the oldest cities in Tennessee. Very old city, actually. It goes back a couple hundred years, I think, at least. And in the downtown area of Morristown, a Michigan man came down here. He stowed a bunch of containers of gasoline all around the downtown. And his plan was to just go around and start burning down these old buildings, some of which were derelict and empty. And he burned down one, and then he was apprehended, and then ended up confessing and telling, authorities, local authorities, where he had stashed all these other gas cans and incendiaries. But the downtown area of Morristown right now is still blocked off because of that. There was debris all over the streets and big mess. I forget how much damage this one guy caused, but it was a lot. It was, I believe, at least hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage. What is that? Well, that's terrorism. And we can expect to see more and more stuff like that. You have this person coming down from a very left-leaning, communist sympathetic state to Tennessee, which is a pro Second Amendment, very conservative, old fashioned American state, and that's the reason why I moved down here. God bless Tennessee, land of the free. If we do get into a civil war scenario again, you want to be in a state that's going to have your back against the corrupt federal government. And that's just one reason of many why I'm down here in East Tennessee. But, you know, there it is. Terrorist attack right down here in, a few miles from where I live. Crazy. But then there was this event that happened not real far from where I used to live in Maryland. So the Francis Scott Key Bridge was one of the supports was hit by a cargo ship and took out a key support column, and most of the bridge collapsed. Vehicles went into the water. Crazy stuff, absolutely crazy stuff. It happened in the early hours of the morning. That's what the bridge used to look like. I believe it was, well, I don't know which side the video footage was taken from. It was this support here or this one here, one or the other, that was hit by this cargo vessel and took out the bulk of this central section here. You can see this stuff online via, for example, the Gateway Pundit here, Astounding. Absolutely astounding. Yeah, here it is. You can see that central structure of the bridge, and then one of the main supports. Awful. Um, and then people are now talking about, was it really an accident? Because this is one of the well, here we go, second busiest strategic roadway for hazardous materials. Um, Baltimore is a huge, very busy port. It's also, incidentally, the human trafficking capital of North America. By the way, little fun fact for you. Um, but you know what? I'll show you this since it's really interesting. If I can find it quickly. Yeah, 8x speed really exaggerates how sharp the dolly turned just before striking the bridge. So this is that cargo vessel. So the ship had a couple power outages and then altered course at the last minute and struck this support. And people are wondering if the ship was hacked or if this was somehow an act of intentional sabotage of infrastructure. And I actually would not be surprised at all if it was. But let's take a look at this little video. So 8x speed, yeah, you can see that it pulls this crazy, crazy turn there right at the end. Um, I'm not going to Instagram, but you know, that's like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if this was another, because America's an open society, open border, literally millions of illegals flooding in. They captured one guy who'd been in prison for almost a decade in, I want to say it was Azerbaijan. They, uh, they, there's a video clip of him talking to observers as he crosses the border, and he tells observers, "You should know who I am. But you're going to hear about me soon enough." And the reporters who, well, anyway, someone who saw that footage and looked this guy up, turns out he was an extremist who was imprisoned in, I believe it was Azerbaijan, on terrorism charges. You have people coming in here who they're openly admitting that they're here to wreak havoc, to kill people, and to attack the United States and commit acts of terror. And why am I bringing all this up? Well, the federal government will not protect you. They're the cause of this, and this is very intentional. The establishment wants to sow chaos because it allows them to. It's very likely that we'll see martial law declared this year, and the government using that, well, or I should say, the establishment using that to assume more control over the American people. That would not surprise me at all. But allowing chaos like this to foment and escalate gives them an excuse, a justification for taking more absolute control as people begin to experience senseless violence and fear and terror, and then they look to someone to provide a solution to that, which would be the establishment, which allowed the problem to exist in the first place. Um, this is the world we live in. As I said, the federal government will not protect you, and your local authorities probably cannot protect you. If you think about it, police, they're primarily a reactive force. And the Uvalde school shooting illustrated really just how ineffectual police can be. And then we had the Nashville shooting, which those officers responded in an exemplary manner, but they're still a reactive force. As excellent a job as those Nashville police officers did, they're reactive. Innocent people died before they made it to the scene, and that's just the way it is. Because this isn't Minority Report where the police can, where there's pre-crime units who can read people's minds and tell if they're going to do a crime in advance and stop them before it happens. That doesn't happen. That's not reality. Police are a reactive force. There's that saying that when seconds matter, the police are only minutes away. Uh, it's a good way to think of it. Understand that we're entering an era where you are responsible for your safety and no one's going to be around to help you. Or I should say, you can't count on anyone being around to help you when things get really ugly. I've been thinking about this a lot. About a month ago, I had an extremely vivid dream. Uh, I was sitting in my car eating lunch, which is something that I do, when I'm working. And in my dream, I heard a car door slam, and so I look up and I look through the dashboard of my car, and I see a guy walking towards me with an M4 style rifle, and I just hear the pops as he opens fire on me, and I can hear the bullets coming through the windshield. The engine block is stopping a few of them, but I can tell that I'm taking some hits to the shoulder and to the arm, and there's glass flying, and so I dive down and reach. Well, let's just say I have some protective measures, and so anyway, I dive down, and then that was the end of the dream. And it was extremely vivid. I do have really vivid dreams sometimes, and so I'm not reading too much into this. It's my subconscious. I'm very aware of stories like these, like the ones we've been talking about here. Um, and So it's probably just my subconscious processing this stuff. But since then, I've just been kind of more aware than I usually am, and I'm usually pretty wary and situation aware when I'm out in public. But just going to church and things like that, I'm looking around, I'm thinking, man, if someone was up there on that balcony on that side, the balcony of the church that we never use, and they came in with an AR-15, one magazine, and they could, kill half the congregation. And if no one there had a sidearm, there'd be no recourse because someone would be up there at that vantage point, and you just have no ability whatsoever to defend yourself. You'd be a sitting duck. There's no way that everyone would be able to get out of the sanctuary, before. These are things that we need to be more aware of. I lived very briefly for a couple years in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was actually there during the time that there was that Charleston church shooting, mass shooting. We just need to be, you need to be more aware of your environment, take means to protect yourself and your family, uh, because there may not be anyone else when things go wrong. And when an evil person decides that they're going to kill some innocent civilians to make a political statement or to stir things up and manipulate public opinion or what have you, um, you want to have some recourse. You want to be able to at least have a chance of doing something. Uh, I see. So you guys know that I'm a born again, Bible believing Christian. I do have a biblical worldview. I see a lot of people today, and their mantra is pray, 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 and leave it all in God's hands. Well, that's all well and good, except that's not really what the Bible has ever taught. Um, there were plenty of situations where the appropriate attitude that we should have is um, do what we can and leave the result in God's hands. I'm not saying we don't pray. I'm not saying we don't trust God. Absolutely we do. But we have responsibilities to act in certain situations. And specifically in this area of defending ourselves, defending our families, defending our communities, and defending our states against corrupt government. I have not done a full video on this yet, but at some point I want to do a video. Was Jesus Christ a pacifist? And are Christians supposed to be pacifists? The answer is a resounding no. You look at the Old Testament, the prophets were men of war. Some of them, went out and hewed false prophets and kings in pieces with the sword. The judges were men of war, specifically raised up to wage war against God's enemies. And Jesus Christ used physical force to clear the temple And we know that Jesus Christ is going to return as a conquering king, bearing a sword and purging his enemies. Now, that being said, we have to be careful because Christians are not called. Jesus specifically said this, that his kingdom is not of this earth, and we are not called to create a Christian kingdom on earth through physical violence. But at the same time, we do have a responsibility to defend the innocent, defend our families. If you're a Christian man, you have a responsibility to protect your life, to protect your wife and your children, um, and the innocent and defenseless around you. Uh, well, I mean, you can, I guess, delegate that duty if you like, or shirk it, but the consequences and the blood are on your head in that case. I, for one, choose to try to be as prepared as possible and to do what I can and leave the rest in the Lord's hands. And I would just encourage you to be aware, because this is the world we live in now. It is a powder keg. It's already burning. It's a powder keg that's burning. And so that's a good picture of where we're at. Things could get very, very ugly very quickly. Uh, these are the sorts of scenes that we're seeing now. Media blocked from scene where hundreds of illegals overran the National Guard in El Paso. Over 200,000 deportation cases dismissed because the Biden regime failed to file required paperwork because they're complicit in this. They want these mobs to swarm into the United States. Russia retaliates using hypersonics. Understand that there's no counter for these hypersonic weapons. Let that sink in a little bit. So the United States, we as a rising superpower, we emphasized air superiority and communications. Those were our trump cards, our key pivotal technologies. Okay. And the aircraft carrier, is part of that package as a mobile sea platform for launching our aircraft. Air superiority anywhere in the world. Um, so understand that other nations in recent decades have come up with technologies that are specifically designed to trump our best technologies. So you've got nations like Russia focusing on missile technology, specifically hypersonic missiles. So the Russians have the best missiles and they have the best missile defense systems in the world right now. It's a fact. Specifically designed to counter American capabilities. And likewise, the Chinese have been emphasizing EMP technology. Really, these two lines of technology together kind of negate a lot of American advantages. So if you're thinking that America is always going to be, if you're, let's put it this way, if your attitude is the same attitude as those living in Mystery Babylon, which is, I will always be a queen of nations, I will never know loss of children, well, what God says to Mystery Babylon is, well, guess what? You will not always be a queen of nations, and you will know loss of children. Um, so don't be arrogant and think just because America's always been a superpower and the world's always been stable and good for the West and for Westerners and for Americans that it's always going to continue that way. Um, God raised up the West because we honored him and built our culture and societies around the scriptures. And God is judging the West because we are choosing to abandon him. And that's the world we live in now. God is going to give the victory to America's enemies if America doesn't straighten up. I hope you found this to be interesting and useful. As I mentioned, seek food independence now. Good time to get interested in things like beekeeping for the honey, and in a pinch you can eat the bees themselves. Or grow in a garden, or hydroponics if you don't have any outdoor yard space. You could maybe do indoor hydroponics, grow stuff that way, uh, or have chickens, get a few head of cattle, seek food independence. And if you can't grow your own food, stockpile some rice and beans, 5-gallon buckets with desiccants. That'll last you a while. Prepare. Have enough food and water on hand for, well, I'd say months, 4 to 6 months at least. But we could very much be in for an extremely rough ride if God does not grant us a reprieve. All right, well, thanks for watching. Have a good one.